This is hashtag Surviving Alzheimer's, a caregiver's podcast based on the book Surviving Alzheimer's with friends, Facebook, and a really big glass of wine. I'm Dana Steele, and I lost my mom, Fran Nicholson, to Alzheimer's. Now I share stories from other caregivers and the experts who help us through this crazy journey. This podcast is brought to you in part by the book Surviving Alzheimer's with friends, Facebook, and a really big glass of wine. When Mom was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, I posted it on Facebook. What started as a way to let friends and family know Mom had Alzheimer's turned into a support system for me, and from that turned into a support system and a community. The first half of the book is the Facebook post, and that's to give people a sense of you're not alone. There's no right, there's no wrong. It's okay to laugh at inappropriate things. It's okay to cry. It's okay to say bad words, drink wine, and throw things. The other half of the book is very important resources for caregivers. The one thing I want you to take away is you never know. Love your family. Love everyone. Take every adventure. Do everything, but also make sure you have everything ready to go and you're organized in the background so that when all is said and done, you have lived today. I wish I had known. And if I wish I had known, I think there's other people that wish they could know what's coming next. Surviving Alzheimer's with friends, Facebook, and a really big glass of wine is available at Amazon in paperback and Kindle versions. And now, back to the podcast, Surviving Alzheimer's with Dana Steele. Joining me on hashtag Surviving Alzheimer's today is a very dear friend, a Canadian, a very dear friend who lives near us in Houston, Marcus Gurske. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having me on. Thanks for letting me come share my story.
Well, I usually have to chase people down. Experts come to me and go, I would like to tell my story. And then when I want to actually hear real stories, I have to chase people pretty much. But you came to me. What made you come to me and say, I want to tell my story?
Well, my wife and I, good friends, you and Charlie are to us as Kathy and I, and it was just after seeing the show in Houston when you did, presented it there, and my mother passed away from Alzheimer's in 2016, and it like anything, it takes time to grieve, and so seeing the show kind of set me forward on a journey in dealing with my grief with the passing of my mother, and then the reality of just what her, and I don't want to use the word journey because it's not fair, I find, to her and her passing, but just where Alzheimer's took her and what it did to our family, and then how it affected my relationship with my wife, and took me to come to terms with that, and then also then with my brother.
And I think journey is an okay word because it is a journey. A journey can be good, a journey can be bad, a journey can be, good weather, bad weather, a good experience, bad experience.
Yeah.
And it is a different journey for every single person. Before we get into the actual, your thoughts about it, what are, of course, he's talking about my play, The Woman in the Mirror, which we're getting ready to do in Palm Springs. Are there any particular scenes that made you really start this new part of your journey?
Yeah, there were a couple, and it was little things, right? It wasn't anything like super glaring, but it's like taking Mom to the hairdresser, taking Mom to the nail salon, family gatherings, right? And those moments that you touched on in your play, which, by the way, I encourage everyone to go see it. It was therapeutic for me. I know anybody else who's gone through this or has experienced this or is going through it will definitely be able to relate. So yeah, it was just about everyday things that you do with your parents when they're going down this path and how they're changing and how you're trying to create normalcy, but nothing is normal. It just is what it is. And you can't force it. You can't guide it. You can't steer it. It's very reactive. As much as we want to be proactive in dealing with these things or addressing issues, you can never get in front of this. And that can be very taxing. It is very taxing on everyone involved.
Well, and you and I are very much alike in that we're extremely organized to a fault that drives everyone in our lives crazy. But I mean, it's what we do. You do events, I do podcasts and plays and whatever. We have to be scheduled down to seconds every
Yeah,
day of our life. And with Alzheimer's, I thought, okay, I think I know what this is. I thought I know what, and I'm gonna study it. I'm gonna read what other people have done. I'm gonna organize it. I'm gonna compartmentalize it. And this will be when I work on Alzheimer's, and this will be when I work on Dana, and this will be when I spend time with the family. Oh no, no, Alzheimer's throws that right out the window.
totally. And as a show director, which I do, and then when I curate thought leadership conferences, I plan things, I anticipate things. And again, as I said, there's no anticipation because every day is different. You don't know what you're going to get yourself into, and the stages of it vary, right? Some days everything is great, everyone's happy. The next day there can be tears and emotional, just emotional abuse, right? Because you don't know what you're going to get, you don't know who you're going to get, and you don't know how it's going to go or where it's going to go. It's a total roller coaster. So yeah, for the people who are type A's, it's not a good process. And in my situation, I was removed. My brother was the primary caregiver, so I really had to adjust myself that I can't parachute in and fix things. I can't just, drop into a situation. I have to read the room and step into a moment. That could be a really good moment. It could be a really bad moment.
But did you
And
try? Did you try it? Because you and
oh,
I do parachute a
oh,
lot in and try to fix things because that's our job is
absolutely.
to
Yeah.
fix a crisis.
Yeah, absolutely. Ironically enough, that's how we met, right? It was crisis management training. We were providing that to clients.
It is.
And that's exactly right. I tried to do that. That was really hard. There were some hard moments and really struggle moments between my brother and myself where, he finally said, listen, you're not helping. You're making it worse. And my dad at the time, who was the primary caregiver as well, he didn't know how to voice that, right? His concern was literally one thing: taking care of my mother, the love of his life. That was it, full stop. So if I was unsure or I didn't know or I wasn't helping or I was a hindrance, he just put all that aside and focused on her, which was amazing, right? Like
Oh, how sweet.
he
How
was a
sweet.
man that literally came to Canada as a refugee in 1951 with two suitcases and two words. Those two words were thank you. That's all he knew, right? And pulled them up by the bootstraps, and they bootstrapped and they built a great life for themselves and my brother and I, who came along later. And but he was never one to do the cooking or the cleaning. He was never one to take care of the finances. That was all my mom, traditional roles, right? And um and then when my mom got sick, he had to transition, and it was amazing to see a man in his 70s literally do a 180. But again, that was his focal point. But for my brother and I, it created a lot of tension because again, I'm trying to do what I do best, and it wasn't working and it wasn't helping because they were still up in Canada in Edmonton and Alberta, and I was down in Houston. So again, we had to have a moment where we sorted ourselves out as siblings so I could be supportive in a way that mattered, right? In a way that actually took the stress off. And and I'll share this moment of this is probably the greatest frustration we had with our dad and our dad with us as his sons is when he, unfortunately, due to his health deteriorating, had to have triple bypass surgery and had to go in the hospital and then to a rehab facility. He was out for about 3 months, surgery
Oh
into a rehab.
no. And he was
At that
stressed out of his mind worrying about her.
Exactly. But at that point, my brother and I took the opportunity to put my mom into a home because my brother couldn't handle it, and I wasn't there full time. And as a result of just the added stress, that's what put my dad in his situation. So there was a moment there where he was not very happy with us as his sons, but we had to do what was right for her. The level of care she required was no longer the level of care he could provide or we could provide at home. And that was a bonding moment for my brother and I because we came together to realize this is what's best for mom. Now, going into a home and being institutionalized was so disheartening as the person, as her sons, I would come and visit. and see her surroundings and see her deteriorating
I
over the
have to
time that
stop
she
you
was
there because
there.
I
Yeah,
hate the word institutionalized because
yeah,
that's,
totally.
because that's what people envision. That's what,
Yeah,
and these places are nice for the most part. The majority of them are, yes, you may smell urine or whatever. I'm just going to be very honest here, but
totally.
it's not like they were when my mom was growing up. My mom was one of 8 kids, and one of her
Yeah.
sisters was born mentally challenged and
Hmm.
was immediately put into a home. And they
Yeah,
would go visit her maybe once every 4 months. And, to my mom, that's what she was always scared of being put into. So,
for
okay,
sure.
keep going.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. I think our parents were the same vintage. My mom was born in 1933, and absolutely there was the stigma that came along with that. And that was part of the reason my dad didn't want her to go to a home because he didn't want to have, what he envisioned or what he thought the home was. But yeah, it was really hard. The first home she went to actually was pretty nice. But then as more care was required, we had to then move her to another home, and that's when things got really challenging. And of course, also her outbursts at times, right? It's some days you get Dr. Jekyll, the other day you get Mr. Hyde, and then flip flop, and you don't know what you get. It's coming at you from all different angles. And but that moment really crystallized my brother and I to be on the same page and me to understand how I can support him. And my dad was really upset with us, but it was then really hard as we moved forward because we knew we made the right decision. We knew that had to happen, not only for my mom, but also for my dad because it was not going well. And for my brother moving back home to help take care of not one, but actually both of them, it really challenged, it was just challenging all around. And then, of course, my father's deteriorating health over time. He lost his driver's license, which was his mobility and his freedom. He would go every day to the home to feed her, take care of her, and also help some of the care staff in the home with other patients, feeding them and also helping them. Because one of the things we just realized, I think now is, we talk about the gray hair tsunami. We don't have enough long-term care beds. We don't have enough caregivers, um, not just in Canada, but in the US and North America to deal with this issue. And it's really hard to see sometimes people in that situations are so vulnerable and they just, it's really sad. And then how that spilled over into my marriage, right? Wanting almost not expose my wife to that because I felt so bad. And I felt like, oh, she doesn't need to see this. Or we'd go home for Christmas and we'd go have Christmas dinner at the home and visit. And it was really, really hard. And we had some moments where I was sometimes ashamed, just purely ashamed of just the circumstance and the situation. And again, I had to realize that she married me for all of me, not just parts of me. And that was my family included. And we had some challenges sometimes to work through things. And I'm so happy that I had her there all the way, to support me in that. And also, she has older parents who, of course, have both passed. And at the end, her mother too had some memory issues and dementia issues. So, we went through this together. But yeah, it really stressed me out. And then, of course, subsequently, also my brother. We had our ups and downs. For the most part, we were always on the up from the moment we put my mom to the home. But there were some challenges. And then,
There's a couple of lines that come to mind in the play, and one of
sure,
them, the first one is, Charlie just wants his girlfriend back. I'm trying to take care of everybody, but I can't take care of everybody.
yeah,
And Charlie's trying to do the best he can when I say, "Oh my God, I hate this. I hate her. I hate this whole thing. I don't know what to do." And he doesn't know what to say. He's trying to be supportive, but he just wants his girlfriend, his lover back. And there's a line where the other actor says to me, "When's the last time you had sex?" And I said, I'm just not even going to answer that.
yeah,
And it is to let people know that caregivers just don't feel sexy. I mean, after you deal with this, so it does have a really, really hard. I mean, I've talked about this in the play, I've never talked about it on the podcast. It does have a really hard effect on a relationship, on a marriage. Now, after I lost my mom, and we were trying to recover from that. Then Charlie's family was going through it with
Hmm.
his mom,
I
and
remember.
he was away like you. He was away. Plus, you have a brother who's a neurologist, so you can't really argue with him, even though we would see things and go, "That's not how we would do it." But it's an incredible family dynamic right now in Houston. The McNair family, and this
Yeah,
family dynamic is, you don't escape it with money. You don't escape it at all. The McNair family, who own the Houston Texans and
yeah.
have more money than dirt, the matriarch is going through it right now, and the sons are fighting over. I mean, it's in court right now. What do we
It's very
do?
public.
It's very
Yeah,
public, and it's very
yeah,
sad because families need to have a plan. They need to have these discussions, whether you own a football team or not. You need to sit down and start saying, odds are somebody's going to have this happen.
yeah.
It is. It just is. And it's because we're living longer, and the longer you live, the greater your chances of having some form of dementia.
100%. And so there's 2 points I want to share on that. The first one is my dad isolated himself and my mom because my mom was having anxiety attacks due to, the early onset of her dementia and Alzheimer's. And there was, you know, there was just um, being ashamed is the best way to describe it. My dad was really insecure about these things, and he felt it was easier as opposed to having to explain the circumstances just to shut everybody out. And we had a great family dynamic in a broader sense from my mom's side of the family that was really engaging, but my dad just didn't know how to cope. So the easiest thing to do was just to shut everything and everyone out. Because people would come up, family members, longtime friends of the church they belonged to, and be like, "Hey Rose, how are you? Great to see you." My mom would just go, "I don't know you and I'm kind of scared." And that went from I'm kind of scared to I'm very scared. And my dad then had to deal with that. So the easiest way to do that was just to shut everybody out.
To hide her.
And exactly, and himself as well. And then when my mom passed, my dad started to re-engage for a little bit with some people, but people were actually, as we can be sometimes, cruel human beings, intentionally or unintentionally, were like, "Well, we haven't heard from you for 15 years. What happened to you?" And my dad didn't have the voice at that moment, the capacity to sometimes share that, but he still then was put off by that. So that was a real challenge for him. And then, when my mom passed, my dad passed 32 days later. We said my dad passed of a broken heart. He had an embolism that went to his brain, was an aneurysm. And, we said but he was totally lost for those 32 days, right? It was quick and very abrupt. But when we came to write my mom's obituary, there were so many things we didn't know in the moment. And there were so many things that were so hard to kind of pull together, and we were scrambling. And this is the big thing. The second thing I want to say is when you have them take the time, sit down together as a family, and you don't just say, "Hey, we're writing your obituary." That sounds a little harsh, little cold, but just tell the story. When did mom and dad meet? Who were the grandparents? What were their names? Where were they from? Is all these things when you're sitting down in this moment to write in basically, a couple hundred words of their life, and you don't have that at your fingertips because you haven't bothered to ask, or you don't know, or no one ever shared the story. It's really stressful.
And if you start asking, when my grandmother, Lorraine Nicholson, Nana, died, I had no idea she was a teacher. And I would pick her up every Thursday, and we would go to Luby's and have the Luann special. And but I had no idea that before she met my grandfather, she was a teacher and she was engaged to somebody else. And her fiance asked his best friend, "Keep an eye on Lorraine while I'm gone. If she needs anything, you know, can you take care of her? I've got to go travel for business." And she eloped with him. So but I found out all
These
these things
stories.
after the fact. So, my mom had all of her obituaries written.
Yeah,
Another one of those things that we look back and go, she knew. So she
yeah,
was taking care of all these things. But, Wonder Husband, Charlie's father, when he passed, he had everything taken care of. Everything was
yeah.
paid for, everything down to what flowers, what kind
Hmm.
of viewing, I mean, we didn't have to do anything. And I came home after that week in Miami and sat my parents down and said, this was oddly one of the most special, enjoyable.
Yeah.
It was just a nice family. We weren't all scrambling, trying to figure out what to do, what to write. Everything was there, everything was taken care of. And all we had to do, our job, was to comfort each other.
Yeah, totally. And when my dad passed, we then actually sat down in between the two, that short time frame, and said, Dad, tell us the story. Remind us. Because again, you know, it was what it was. He was a young immigrant to Canada in 1951. He came, his sister was already here, who was 2 years older. She's now, of course, passed as well. We had no tie to the history. So we actually sat down with him and, had a bottle of wine and a couple, and three of us and just sat and talked. And I'm just like making notes. My brother's making notes, and it was just a great way for us to bond actually after the passing of my mom. But I wish we would have done that with my mom. Now you touch on a point where some people plan because they think something's coming. My mother did some great things. We set up a family trust, to avoid the hassle of finances, right? Because everything was in there set up for us to deal with their estate and their passing. And again, I think instead of putting these things away like we've done in the past because we're ashamed by it or we're uncertain by it or we're intimidated, no, we got to embrace it. Is
We're all gonna die unless you have found
exactly.
a way out and not told any of us.
Yeah.
Or as Charlie says, there's only two people who didn't, or there's only two people who came back. Everybody else
Yeah.
goes, "Who?" I'll let you go look that up.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, sit
True.
down and when you go to a family gathering, Easter, Christmas,
Yeah.
Thanksgiving, Hanukkah, whatever you celebrate, there's always the older people sitting over in the corner of the room that
Yeah.
nobody wants to talk to, or that's my great aunt. I don't know. And just sit down and ask her, who was the first love of your life?
Yeah.
Because a lot of
Great
times
story.
those long-term memories are still there and they will tell you
Yes.
the stories.
Yeah. And that's exactly right. They age in reverse and when they share some of those nuggets and that was what we really embraced with my mom's passing, my dad's passing, their celebration of life. We shared stories. You know, Dana, as you know, I'm one of the biggest heathens out there, self-proclaimed. My parents were very, strong believers in their belief, and we honored that by having their, of course, like the funeral and everything in the church as they wanted. But when it came time afterwards, we didn't dwell on that scripture. We didn't dwell on that hymn. We took some of that ceremony and put it aside, and we focused on celebrating their life and why they were important. And we invited people to not just be there to mourn with us, but we invited people to come together and celebrate and remember funny stories, right? We'll remember those some tearful moments, some stressful moments. But again, that all goes into life, right? It's all one, it all goes in the blender, and what comes out is what comes out. And we
When my
had
dad,
wonderful moments.
when we had my dad's memorial, I decided to have all of the foods my mom had taken away from him because she thought they weren't healthy
Yeah,
for him. So we had Lone Star beer, we had Velveeta queso and chips, and I picked up 100 Jack in the Box tacos, and people would walk in and go, "Oh, I am so sorry about your day. Oh my God, are those Jack in the Box tacos?"
exactly, right? Yeah, it was for us, those German pastries, right, that we would have after Sunday, lunch. That was a big meal of the week for us growing up. So if there was a little cake or a tort, and we did the same thing to celebrate that, and yeah, it was just that was really, really, I think that started the recovery from the grieving process. But then for me, most recently, again, a few years ago, as we saw the show in Houston, and then Kathy and I talking to my wife about some of these things, and me getting over the a self-imposed burden of feeling bad, feeling ashamed. And it's like, no, I have to stop feeling that way because it's not healthy, number one. Number two, it doesn't help my relationship with my wife. Um, and so again, yeah, it was just a way. Like I have to thank you because it really started a journey for me to to heal and continue to heal and work on parts of myself so I don't do what my dad did, which was shut things out. Can't put it in a box. Deal with those emotions, face them. Sometimes it's hard, but I've come out better for it, and I know I'm going to keep getting better, and just be more at peace with myself too. Right? My parents provided a great life for my brother and I. They cared for us. You know, we learned a lot of really good lessons, and um, and I'm forever thankful for that. And just because they're not gone doesn't mean they're still in my heart. When my parents pass away now, or someone close to them, I don't say my condolences. I think that's very kind of just whatever. Everybody says that. I share the words very simply of the best parts of them live on with you, and you are their shining light.
Hashtag Surviving Alzheimer's is produced by JFA Inc. and Blue Squirrel Productions, copyright 2024. Executive producer Dana Steele. Original music written and performed by Calvin Adams. The book Surviving Alzheimer's with Friends, Facebook, and a really big glass of wine is available in paperback and Kindle on Amazon.com. For more information, visit thewomaninthemirrorplay.com.